And on to section 4. There's about 3 pages, just if you're keeping track. So a little bit longer than I like to do, but trying to keep the sections intact. So number 4, and I should say there's going to be occasional stuff that is difficult also for me to understand or explain, but I'm going to do my best. This is also an important section. So developing the idea of signs and the concepts of signs and symbols. If you recall previously, he had mentioned this distinction between natural signs and artificial signs. So we'll go into that a little bit and develop out of that the concept of sign, or the distinction between signs and symbols. So let's go. So for it is by agreement in conjoint action of the kind already described that the word smoke stands in the English language for an object of certain qualities. So we've talked before about this idea of meaning. If that's, we'll see some different words for meaning here, but let's say meaning for now. That the meaning of words comes through, that would be the right term actually here. So meaning. The meaning of words comes out of operation in conjoint action. So we've seen that idea before. In some other language, the same vocable and mark may stand for something different, and an entirely different sound stand for smoke. To such cases of representation, the word artificial signs applies. When it is said that smoke as an actual existence points to, is evidence of, an existential fire, smoke is said to be a natural sign of fire. So this is one kind of traditional distinction between natural signs and artificial signs, where a natural sign is when we take actual smoke to indicate possible fire or the existence of fire. And an artificial sign is something where a sound or mark on paper is used to be an indication of some existence. So the sound smoke we might take to be an indication of an existence of smoke, an existence of a thing which is smoke. Right? So there's a difference there. Morse Peckham will later call this a difference between nonverbal signs and verbal signs. And then it becomes even more clear in a way, because you're talking about words as signs versus things that aren't words as signs. In any case, so artificial signs and natural signs. Similarly, heavy clouds of given qualities are a natural sign of probable rain, and so on. The representative capacity in question is attributed to things in their connection with one another, not to marks whose meaning depends on agreement in social use. So natural signs, we're thinking about existences, objects, qualities in relation to one another, how clouds are related to rain, rather than how words are related to things, depending on social use, social coordination, conjoint action. There is no doubt of the existence and the importance of the distinction designated by the words natural and artificial signs. So this is a real distinction, but the fundamentally important difference is not brought out by these words. For reasons now to be given, I prefer to mark the difference by confining the application of sign to so-called natural signs, employing symbol to designate artificial signs. So there's reasons why, which Dewey will give us, there's reasons why this distinction between natural and artificial is not quite satisfactory. Dewey is going to use sign and symbol to talk about this difference between natural and artificial. So the difference just stated is actual, as we're talking about a real difference here, but this natural artificial distinction it fails to note the distinctive intellectual property of what I call symbols. So it doesn't help us understand symbols that well. It is, so to speak, an incidental and external fact, logically speaking, that certain things are given representative function by social agreement. The fact becomes logically relevant, so this fact that things become representative by social agreement, this becomes logically relevant only because of the possibility of free and independent development of meanings in discourse, which arises once symbols are instituted. So the important difference is going to be that so-called artificial signs, or what Dewey is going to call symbols, can be used in developing meanings in a free kind of way, in discourse, in language, in conversation. That's really going to be the important thing. The meaning of symbols can be developed in that way, whereas natural signs or signs, the significances of these are not so developed. They're not, you cannot make those independent, right? To do that is to start using symbols. Okay, but that will become clearer, I think, as we go. So he'll continue developing this idea. A natural sign by description is something that exists in an actual spatial temporal context, right? So it has a kind of concrete existence in the world that we are in the situation that we are in, the spatial temporal context we are in. Smoke, as a thing having certain observed qualities, is a sign of fire only when the thing exists and is observed. So smoke has to be observed for it to be a natural sign. Otherwise, we need to use the word sign, then we're talking about symbols, right? But for smoke to signify, it has to be there in our environment, in our context, in our immediate experience. Its representative capacity, taken by itself, is highly restricted, for it exists only under limited conditions. So its meaningfulness, its what Dewey will call its significance, is very heavily restricted because of the context. The situation is very different when the meaning smoke is embodied in an existence, like a sound or a mark on a paper, when we're talking about a symbol. The actual quality found in existence is then subordinate to a representative office. So then the actual sound or the actual existence, right? The sound of the word smoke, the letters smoke that you see here on the page or on the screen, this becomes not so important as the, what does he say? So it's becomes subordinated to the representative function, right? The meaning becomes more important. So we've talked before about how these the actual existences that come to be representative are arbitrary or conventional, right? You can have different words for them in different languages, which shows that the representative function is more, or what he calls the representative office is more important than the actual sound or the actual marks on the paper that you see. Not only can the sound be produced practically at will, so that we do not have to wait for the occurrence of the object, but what is more important, the meaning when embodied in an indifferent or neutral existence is liberated with respect to its representative function. It's no longer tied down, right? So when we are using symbols, when we're using words, they're no longer tied down to a specific context. We can produce them, as he says, practically at will. We can talk about smoke anywhere, even when there is no smoke actually present. A symbol, for example, can be related to other meanings in the language system, or the meaning, rather, of a symbol can be related to other meanings in the language system. not only to that of fire, but to such apparently unrelated meanings as friction, changes of temperature, oxygen, molecular constitution, and by intervening meaning symbols to the laws of thermodynamics. So we can develop the meaning of smoke by relating it to all these other diverse things, which may or may not be present for us in the environment, which may or may not be actually experienceable by us, right? We don't really experience oxygen per se, at least normally. We need oxygen, but it's not something we can really normally touch or see or hear or smell. I guess, does oxygen have some oxygen combined with other stuff has smells, but in any case, it's not kind of a normal part of our experience, but we can relate things to it through words, right? Smoke is something that can be part of our experience, but we can separate it out with this word. We can use the word smoke even when there's no smoke and relate it to other things that may or may not be in our experience, even potentially. So that's developing things through discourse. I shall accordingly in what follows connect sign and significance, symbol and meaning, respectively, with each other in order to have terms to designate two different kinds of representative capacity. So sign is going to go with significance. When a sign kind of indicates something else, as smoke might indicate the presence of fire, that's going to be its significance. When a symbol will have a meaning. So smoke, the word smoke, might mean for us the substance smoke or other things, but that will be its meaning, right? If the word smoke means for us a certain kind of substance that may or may not be there in the actual environment, that's going to be its meaning. Linguistically, the choice in terms is more or less arbitrary, although sign and significance have a common verbal root, right? Sign, significance, significance. So they're related kind of etymologically, but that's not too important. This consideration is of no importance, however, compared with the necessity of having some words by which to designate the two kinds of representative function. So the important thing is that we keep this difference in mind between signs and symbols, between significances and meanings, whatever words you want to use. You could mentally substitute something else, but the important thing is to keep this difference in mind. Have some way to keep it clear. For purposes of theory, the important consideration is that existent things as signs are evidence of the existence of something else. This something being at the time inferred rather than observed. And inference is going to be a major topic. But yeah, the important thing, existent things, so signs, natural signs, smoke as an actual substance you perceive, this is taken as evidence of something else. You infer from the existence of smoke that maybe there is fire. But words or symbols provide no evidence of any existence, right? When we talk about smoke, it doesn't imply that there is smoke, even in our environment. It doesn't even imply necessarily that smoke exists at all anywhere. So you can't take having a word for something as evidence of an existence of something that the word supposedly represents. Yet what they lack in this capacity, they make up for in creation of another dimension. They make possible ordered discourse or reasoning. So we'll hear this term ordered discourse again and again, which is kind of Dewey's term for reasoning or development of meanings in relation to each other. For ordered discourse may be carried on without any of the existences to which the symbols apply being actually present, right? We can talk about things that are not present. In fact, that's kind of the whole advantage of language, without indeed assurance that objects to which they apply anywhere actually exist, and as in the case of mathematical discourse, without direct reference to existence at all. So ordered discourse reasoning can go on about things which may not actually exist, about things that do not necessarily exist, that do not exist in our experience, that do not necessarily exist in the world at the moment or in the foreseeable future at all. So this kind of produces what Dewey calls another dimension. We don't need to take that too mystically, but it means our ability to develop meanings, to reason, is expanded beyond our possibilities of perception and experience in a kind of immediate sense, beyond our possibilities of contact experience and distance experience, right? Touch, sight, smell, all of that. So something new, a new dimension is created. Ideas as ideas, hypotheses as hypotheses would not exist were it not for symbols and meanings as distinct from signs and significances. The greater capacity of symbols for manipulation is of practical importance. So the fact that we can more easily, we can very easily produce and manipulate words relative to actual things, but this pales in comparison with the fact that symbols introduce into inquiry a dimension different from that of existence. Different from words exist, or meanings, I should say, rather, exist in a way that is different from the existence of things like clouds and trees and smoke and tables and chairs and all of that. Clouds of certain shapes, size, and color may signify to us the probability of rain. They portend rain, right? So that's talking about the significance of signs. So clouds are existences, so they can function for us as signs indicating other possible things, like rain in this case. But the word cloud, when it is brought into connection with other words of a symbol constellation, enable us to relate the meaning of being a cloud with such different matters as differences of temperature and pressures, the rotation of the earth, the laws of motion, and so on. Okay, just checking my notes. Right, so this kind of repeats what he said before. When you have a word with a meaning, it can be brought into connection with other words, so relating the meaning of that to much more distant things like temperature and pressure, the rotation of the earth, laws of motion, and so on. So these things exist more for us as meanings, right? We might say concepts, to use another word, or ideas, maybe is a better word here. So it's an idea that we can use to kind of understand what's happening around us beyond what is immediately perceptible, right? We don't really perceive that the earth is rotating, but we can talk about the rotation of the earth, right? And that can help us understand many other things, such as clouds, for example, the formation of clouds. The difference between sign significance and symbol meaning, in the sense defined, is brought out in the following incident. And Dewey's going to give a little anecdote here. This comes from, I think this was, well, not originally, it kind of maybe became famous through the Ogden and Richards book, The Meaning of Meaning. This is a well-known book on meaning. It was reported somewhere else. I think Dewey refers just to the Ogden and Richards book, but they take it from somewhere else, and I can't remember The original source could be easily looked up. Anyway, kind of an anthropological story. A visitor in a savage tribe wanted on one occasion the word for table. There were five or six boys standing around, and tapping the table with my forefinger. So this is the anthropologist talking or writing. The anthropologist recalling his experience. So he says, tapping the table with my forefinger, I asked, "What is this?" One boy said it was dodela, another that it was an atanda. A third stated that it was bokali, a fourth that it was elamba, and the fifth said it was mesa. After the narrator goes on, or I think Ogden and Richards go on, maybe after congratulating himself on the richness of the vocabulary of the language, the visitor found later that one boy had thought we wanted the word for tapping, another understood we were seeking the word for the material of which the table was made, another had the idea that we required the word for hardness, another thought we wished the name for that which covered the table, and the last gave us the word mesa, table. Right? So the anthropologist wanted to know the word for table, so he tapped on the table, thinking, that would be clear enough. But of course, just pointing to something, tapping on something, doesn't tell you what you want necessarily, right? Because things have many properties. Things have many qualities. So a table has many qualities. It's hard. It's made out of something like wood. Maybe it's covered by something like a piece of cloth or something like that. And then there's the gesture itself, the tapping, right? You say, what is this? When you're tapping your finger, oh, so he wants to know what tapping your finger is called. Right, so this tells us, this indicates or illustrates some different things. So this story might, Dewey says, this story might have been quoted earlier as an illustration of the fact that there is not possible any such thing as a direct one-to-one correspondence of names with existential objects. That words mean what they mean in connection with conjoint activities that affect a common or mutually participated in consequence, right? So this is this point that we've seen several times now, that words mean what they mean because of their place in a system or setting of conjoint action. The act of tapping in the illustration was isolated from any such situation. So the anthropologist and the boys are not together trying to accomplish some end, at least not some end that they both understand. And so the tapping is kind of an isolated thing. The boys don't know what the anthropologist wants. The anthropologist kind of misreads what he thinks the boys are understanding from him. So they're not acting together, right? They're not acting together in a concerted way that they all understand. So the act of tapping was isolated from a situation of conjoint action. It was, in consequence, wholly indeterminate in reference. It was no part of communication by which alone acts get significance and accompanying words acquire meaning. For the point in hand, the anecdote illustrates the lack of any evidential status in relation to existence of the symbols or representative values that have been given the name meanings. Right, so again, meanings don't have evidential status. We can talk about things that maybe don't exist. We can talk about ghosts. We can talk about cyclopes. We can talk about ogres and all of that. I think Dewey uses the example of ogre somewhere, maybe in another writing. Right, but we can talk about things that don't have necessary existence, so we can't use words as evidence, as we can use objects as evidence. Without the intervention of a specific kind of existential operation, they cannot indicate or discriminate the objects to which they refer. This is going to be a tricky point. This is one point that I kind of got stuck trying to think about how to explain, but of course it will go into detail in later points of the book. But this idea of existential operation, so doing stuff, words get connected to the world through action, through doing stuff. And this idea has misled, I think, some of Dewey's interpreters, because there's this, what do you call it, a school or theory of meaning, I guess, called operationalism in the sciences, which is more that meaning. The meaning of a concept is the measurements that it requires you to take. And Dewey means operation in a broader sense, right? So there's practical operations in the sense of engaging in conjoint activities, but there's also scientific operations. And so sometimes Dewey is talking about operation in this broader sense of just like any practical activity, any practical doing that involves existential things and not just words. And so the meaning of words becomes kind of stabilized or actualized through conjoint activities, social activities, experimentation, things like that. Reasoning or order discourse, which is defined by development of symbol meanings in relation to one another. An important kind of definition, right? Reasoning or order discourse means development of symbol meanings in relation to one another. But reasoning or order discourse may and should provide a basis for performing these operations, but of itself it determines no existence. So through reasoning, we can come up with ideas about how to act, but reasoning itself does not determine any existential thing, that there is some this or that thing, right? This is kind of like coming up with hypotheses. A hypothesis is an idea about what might exist, but you actually have to do stuff, act in the world to find out if such a thing actually exists. This statement holds no matter how comprehensive the meaning system and no matter how rigorous and cogent the relations of meanings to one another. So it doesn't matter how intricate or coherent or developed your conceptual system is, it still doesn't show that those concepts, the words in your systems, actually refer to concrete things. You need something more to do that. You need concerted action. On the other hand, the story illustrates how, in case the right word had been discovered, the meaning symbolized would have been capable of entering into relations with any number of other meanings independently of the actual presence at any given time of the object table. So if you had come up with the right word table, it could have been used independently of the actual table there. Just as the sign significance relation defines inference, so the relation of meanings that constitutes propositions defines implication in discourse if it satisfies the intellectual conditions for which it is instituted. So here I just want to point out, so sign significance defines inference, and then word meaning in a proposition defines implication. So meanings define implication, significances define inference, right? So from the existence of smoke, we infer fire. Words imply other words, or propositions imply other propositions. So from, say, the proposition, for example, that clouds are made of little drops of water, which I think is true, right? clouds are little drops of water, this proposition implies other propositions, like propositions about how the drops of water got there. So propositions about evaporation and condensation and stuff. So that's implication. But going on here to finish up, unless there are words which mark off the two kinds of relations in their distinctive capacities and offices, with reference to existence, there is danger that two things as logically unlike as inference and implication will be confused. Yeah, so we want to keep those two things straight, inference and implication. So inference to existential things, implication to other meanings. These are very different, right? In the way that the world of existences, the world of things, of objects, is different from the world of language, which can go on independently of our experience of this or that object in the immediate environment. As a matter of fact, the confusion when inference is treated as identical with implication has been a powerful agency in creating the doctrinal conception that logic is purely formal. For, as has been said, the relation of meanings carried by symbols to one another is, as such, independent of existential reference. So taking the idea of implication and conflating it with inference, right, where the one is independent of existential reference and the other is basically embodies existential reference, conflating these two things can give us the idea that logic is a purely formal thing, a purely abstract thing that is separate from our practical experience. And of course, one of Dewey's central points is that this is not the case, that that logic is intimately bound up with our practical experience, with our practical life and practical problem solving, and all of that. Okay, so looks like we are at the end of the 4th section in this chapter. So we'll stop here and continue on with 5 in the next video. Thank you for listening. See ya.